welcome to the weekly show of What is School For? This show is really inspired by my role model, Seth Godin, to ask this question: what is school for, and what is the purpose of education? So on this show, I interview parents, entrepreneurs, business owners, students, homeschoolers, traditional students, non-traditional students, and we come here, we discuss, debate, and disrupt education. The goal is to really, not to blame, but to really figure out a better way that we can raise the next generation, that we can future-proof our children. So today I am so excited to have the parents of my dear friend, Brennan Agranoff, and his parents on the show to unpack parenting for us and to share their journey and their tips and their successes in terms of how they have raised two successful children. I only had the honor to get to know one of them, but both of them are equally amazing. And today we're going to talk about, if your kid is really into entrepreneurship and how we can cultivate that, how can we nurture that, and also how can we help our children become socially, emotionally intelligent, and what are some common parenting mistakes, old practices that need to be disrupted. So we're going to talk about all of that. For those of you who don't know who is Brennan and who their parents are, and you should definitely check out my recent interview with Brennan Agranoff, and I will share the link in the comment section. So Brennan is a self-made entrepreneur, and he started his business when he was only 13 years old and grew that business into a 7-figure and business and selling customer designed socks. And Brandon's work has been featured on so many different places, Inc., CNN, and Entrepreneur, and different places. So I am beyond honored to have his parents, Brennan Agranoff and Amaya and Bryan, to be on the show to share with us how did they make that happen, so we can maybe learn some tips and try to catch up. We were just talking about this. I want them to write a book. I will be their very first customer to learn from people who have done this. So really excited, and Bryan and Maia, and welcome to the show. I am so excited and so honored.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. And we are live on... And my friend from Australia is already here. We already have a dozen people here. Thank you so much, everyone. We are live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Periscope, and on YouTube. So let me know where you guys are joining us live from. So let's dive into the topic. And as I mentioned earlier, I really get to know you through your amazing son. I'm a huge super fan of Brennan, and I had the great honor to actually connect with him in person a few years ago, and I'm really impressed. So if you could share with us, as I introduced earlier, Brennan is pretty amazing. So if you could reflect on your parenting journey and share with us, what are some things that both of you did exceptionally well that have really contributed to your children's success at such a young age?
There you go.
Gosh, that's a hard question to answer because I don't know what produced it, but I can comment. I think for me, the things that we did differently where other parents commented is probably the most useful. One of them I think that stands out to me is our kids always had friends from multiple age groups. We used to laugh when they were little that the average age of their friends was 40 because they would spend their time going to the neighbors' houses who were in their 70s and in their 50s and in their 30s and hanging out with them. And I think that gave them a different context. All their friends were hanging out with kids their own age. And my kids did that too, but they also had these exposure to all these different generations and how to relate with them and how to understand and learn from them. And then also, I think always just expecting the best from them. I always expected them to do the best that they could. And then giving them autonomy to do that. We've been very uninvolved with their school journey. To me, that's their journey. And we've really let them be responsible for that. And we check in with them, obviously, but it's always been theirs to own success or failure. So I think those are the things that stick out to me, is that we did a little bit differently. But Bryan, I'm sure has we have totally different takes on it too. We're very yin and yang here. So.
Like me and my husband.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually agree with most of that, with all that actually. I think one of the things we also, I think our expectation, Maia kind of mentioned this a little bit, but our expectation about, what our kids were capable of, I think I always felt like it was on a different maybe scale from what other people felt, either with their kids or with our own kids. Like I would get people saying, you're going to let him do that? He's only 7 years old, right? Or 8 years old. You're going to let him sell something on eBay? That seems kind of weird. And so, and not in a bad way, but just, hey, that's not normal, And in my mind, it is kind of normal. Like it should be normal, right? And I think if I felt like we always treated our kids. I don't want to say we didn't treat our kids like kids, because I don't think that's right. But I think our expectation of what our kids were capable of was kind of moved a little bit, and we treated them like that. And so, it's important to let kids be kids, obviously, right? But boy, I think we underestimate what our kids are capable of, and I think that's what's really kind of helped us, expect different things from them, I guess.
I love this. You both have already dropped so much value. So I love the first point, mixed age. And I think that's the way to go. When you look at the traditional educational system, only 5 years old, one class, 7 years old in one class. But in my life, I work with people like a wide range of ages. So I really, really love that. So how do you cultivate a mixed age like network for your children? Do you do just bring friends, or you do some networking for them? So how did you facilitate that? Because because if they go to school, they tend to hang out with their friends. How do you break that cycle of only networking with their peers?
Well, in our case, we got super, super lucky. We live out on property, and we call it the compound. It's not really a compound, but we're in rural property, but we have several homes that are close to us. So when our kids were 5 years old, there's not big streets to cross. It was just, little paths to get to the neighbors' houses. And we happened to share, there's 4 of us very closely clumped together. And we had those ages distributed. So our kids would go over and have breakfast with the 75-year-old neighbors. And
love it.
So we got very lucky, but part of it was also encouraging that, allowing it, not saying, well, oh no, you need to call first. We let them negotiate the relationship with them. And if the neighbors didn't want them there, then the neighbors needed to tell them, go home. But that to me is, you have to have that social interaction. And then the other thing I think we do is encourage, even now, them to reach out to mentors for the smallest things. My younger son last week wanted to build a flamethrower, of all things. And we encouraged him to talk to the neighbor across the street, because we knew with that specific question, I said, well, why don't you call Rick? Well, Rick turned 70, and so it's things like that, saying, well, call Rick. He knows better than I do, either look it up or call Rick. And so just encouraging those relationships and allowing them. A lot of parents are terrified of their kids, of other adults having access to their kids. And I think our approach was, instead of being afraid, helping them learn the skills to manage that. And so that it allowed them this wonderful network of people that they don't have to be afraid of, that they can embrace and manage themselves.
I love that. It reminds me of like an article I read a few years ago. There's this one mom, an author. She asked her kid to ride subway in New York City by him or herself. I don't remember. And that has stirred quite a debate. And I love how much you trust your children, give them the autonomy. And I love this comment from Kimberly. Thank you for joining us live. She said, normal is a prison. So commenting on what you mentioned earlier, Bryan. And I also love how you mentioned, when I talk to many parents, they're like, we are involved. We are involved. So Maia, you mentioned earlier that you are uninvolved in terms of Brennan's learning. So can you kind of unpack that for us a little bit? What do you mean that you are not as involved, at least how we interpret involvement?
Well, I mean, I think a great example, I have a couple examples from their elementary school years. I remember in 3rd grade, they had a project where they were supposed to, it was a story report that they had to decorate a cereal box for their story report. And I think he asked for a cereal box, and that was the extent of my involvement. And then we went to the open house, and we're walking down the hallway, and there's all these beautiful, amazingly decorated cereal boxes. And then there's my kid. And literally the entire class had beautiful, well done boxes, everything printed out. And my kid, it just hit me at that time. Your first response as an adult is, oh, this is embarrassing. But it wasn't for me. It was empowering for him. And even though his box was the crummiest looking box, it was the realest one to me. And then the other is, I always laugh because they had crazy hair day at school. And my kids, the ladies in the office, I knew them. I was pretty involved in the school. And they always laughed and they said, for the Agranoff boys, every day is crazy hair day. But then at the end, when my youngest finished 5th grade at the school, the 2 ladies in the front office pulled me aside. And they said, it's funny to see your kids now because you let them come to school with their hair wild. I didn't primp them and comb them every day and make them look perfect. They came as they were. It was their responsibility. And they just laughed at the fact that they saw this happening and how wonderfully they turned out, and that it's really okay to just let go and let them be them. And so I think, I guess that's how I explain that we were not involved. There's that and the responsibility. As far as grades, our rule was always, we expect you to get straight A's, unless there's a good reason. So you need to come talk to us ahead of time. We don't want a surprise. And so that was a conversation we've had with both of our kids, where they would come to us and say, hey, Mom, there's this class for this reason. Anyway, we had a conversation about it. But the expectation otherwise was that they were going to manage that. And the reason we said straight A's is just to keep your opportunities open. Our logic was there's no reason not to, and it's to keep your opportunities open. So
I think what we try to do is we always try to kind of put them on the road and then stay out of their way, make sure that they're inbound, if you will. And it's okay if they kind of go back and forth, and maybe they go out of bounds once in a while. And that's where we would step in and say, hey, you're kind of out of bounds. Let's talk about it or whatever. And I think what I see a lot of is people as parents getting in the way of their children. And if you just and it's hard because it's natural, right? You want to you want the best for them, and you want to control as much as you can, but sometimes that's counterproductive. And so you have to kind of really stop and think about what you're doing and the result you're trying to achieve, and figure out, is what I'm doing protecting them? There's a responsibility as a parent to protect your kids, but is fighting with them about what they're going to wear to school today protecting them? Probably not. That's not the battle I necessarily want to have with them. Not to mention our kids are both colorblind. Going back to Maya's comment about sending them to school, they're not only their hair, but their clothes wouldn't match either because they thought they were wearing matching colors, and that was fine. We weren't going to have that argument every morning. So
that's so incredible. When I first discovered that, I didn't know the other one is also colorblind. But when I first discovered Brennan, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, look at the sauce. I'm going to show everyone. Let me share my screen. I was like, I can't believe it. It's so creative and so nicely done, so innovative. Let me share, everyone. So I actually have, look at some of those socks, right? And you guys can also check out that's their Instagram page. Incredible, right? So actually, I want to this is a nice way. I have a follow-up question on this. So I remember when Brennan came to the show and he shared that he actually taught himself how to do coding, how to run a business, how to do graphic design. So I want to ask you, he started this business when he was 13, very young to me. And many of my own students, at 20 or 25, even older people, they're still trying to discover their purpose in life. So whose idea is it? What was it that give birth to this baby, this sock making business? Whose idea is it? And if it is now your idea, so when this idea was first introduced to the family, were you like surprised or like what like what role did you both play in terms of his business growth and development?
I mean, I think it was a lot of small successes is really what it came down to. And it wasn't like we set out to, I have my own business. My father, my parents had their own business as well, which I worked in. So there was certainly, and as I was kind of thinking about this today a little bit, I was thinking about how that impacted me as a kid. And when I was 16, as soon as I got my license, my dad owned a wholesale laundry in Los Angeles. And so as soon as I was 16 and I had my license, a buddy of mine and I, we put together a flyer and we started knocking on people's doors, asking if they wanted us to pick up and deliver their laundry, because I had I had the ability to get that done. And so, and I don't know exactly what triggered that in me, but certainly seeing my dad do that, I think did have an impact. And so, so anyways, going back to when he was very young, he, I don't know, he always showed an interest in, I don't know, in money and selling things. And, he tells a story about being at a garage sale. Our neighbor, the same neighbor Maia was talking about earlier, actually.
How young was that? Sorry to interrupt you.
He was about 7 at that
point.
Yeah. And, I think that's when he set up an eBay account and, started to kind of learn that a little bit. And, and he had some small successes. He, or at least what he thought were successes at the time. And that's whether they were or not, that's okay. It doesn't matter. But they, I think that elicits, whether it's chemical, I don't know, but it elicits a response in your mind and in your body. Like, that was fun. I'm going to go do something else. And so we would try and certainly not push anything, but provide seeds, if you will, opportunities like, hey, wow, it looked like you had fun doing this. If you go check this out, and if he did, great. And if he didn't, that's okay too, but we kind of left it up to him to check it out and take the initiative to do it. And if he didn't, that probably meant either he didn't have time, which is fine, or he didn't have interest, which is also fine. So that's a little bit, I don't know.
Go ahead.
No, I say that's a great point. Yeah, you go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, in terms of this specific business and where it came from an interest of his to have cool socks. And he bought a pair and he wanted to figure out how to make them. And that's really where the business was born. And it was very, very organic. It was not, oh, let's sit down and do a business. It was him learning how to make the socks. And then he came to us and with a business plan. He got some samples made and then he put them on eBay. They sold out immediately. So then he put together a loan plan and asked us for a loan for the equipment. But that beginning process was very organic. And part of it, I think, was us enjoying learning just as much as he was. So he was out in the garage trying to figure out how to do something with the press, make it work. And he would come in and ask a question and I'd go out there and play with it. I love to learn too. And so I think it was not anything that was planned. It was just a very organic start.
That's so incredible. Like to see, like how you show up to facilitate that and, model positive learning behaviors. I love it. So like, I know I'm running a business. Running a business is hard. And so when he encountered like failures and mistakes, and what do? Do you push him or like you just still give the kid autonomy? This is your business. Do you want to do it or not? Do you push a little bit or just like complete autonomy?
No, I mean, I think we provide, from our experience, right? If there was I don't know, if there's some kind of issue or problem that came up, we would talk about it, and what are some of the options? We talked through what the options were. It wasn't us talking to him though. It was a conversation between the three of us, because the three of us are, by this point, probably all involved in the business at some level. And so it was more of a business conversation than anything else. And certainly there's experience that he's able to draw upon from us because, we have some. And the same is true the other way. I mean, he started to really learn how to handle, as more and more of these situations came up, he would learn how to handle them. And at some point, he actually started handling them better than we did. And to this day, he, when certain kinds of issues come up, he actually is probably the more calming of the three of us in terms of, we got an issue, it's not a big deal. Here's what we're going to do to deal with it. And so, so certainly that's an area he's grown significantly, but it's, so that's, hopefully that gives you some thought.
Oh, totally. And I love this comment from Pam. Thank you for joining us live. Co-own this business, right? It's not like everyone. It's like how I envision education. We co-learn and we co-teach and participatory, right? So I want to kind of shift our focus a little bit. There's quite a long comment from Pam regarding grades. Actually, that's one of my questions. I want to ask you, because how do you draw a balance between academic learning, in terms of specific performance, GPA, A's, B's versus real life learning? And as they grow up, did you put a lot of emphasis on grades, and if that is the case, how does he have time to work on his business? Where do you draw the balance when the real life learning maybe is in conflict in terms of hours with the traditional, going to classes, preparing for exams? And when those two are kind of in conflict, is there one that you focus more on? Or I'm interested in hearing your perspective on this, because most parents I talk to, they seem to focus only on academic learning. And I think that is not the way to moving our children forward. But I want to hear your perspective on this and how you handle this at home with your children.
Again, I think we let them take the lead on this, and it's their job to balance it. But I will say the one conversation that I had talked about if they were expected to get A's, and if not, we wanted to have that conversation. And there was a time that Brennan came to us and said, hey, I need to talk to you. There's this class. It was a college level class. It was a dual credit situation. And he said, I can get an A, but it's going to require this many hours. And I really think those hours are better spent doing his business, because he was learning so much active learning. And so we had that conversation, and he said, I can get a B by doing this, or I can get an A by this. It's really hours that's involved. He didn't feel he was going to get any more value from those hours. It was merely going to be hours put in. And so we said, we totally agree with you, and get the B, apply those hours elsewhere to real life learning. And that's kind of how we handled it. That it didn't happen a whole lot. They also didn't take AP classes that they weren't interested in. If they were not interested in AP biology, we said, don't take AP biology. That's a lot of time and effort that you don't need to spend if that doesn't interest you. And I think a lot of their peers were pressured into taking AP classes because they were AP classes without any thought to why. And we always thought about the why and encouraged them that this is your education journey and you need to own it. And we encourage them to look down the road. What is this going to do for you, positive or negative? And so that's really, we let them, they didn't always take the most rigorous classes. They weren't taking they always had some rigor, but it was their choice. And we supported that.
Yeah, I remember when I met with Brennan in person. Now I just remember he actually shared that with me. He's very smart in terms of deciding which classes he wants to take so that he has some extra time to work on his business. And that's lots of agency, self-directed learning. I love that. Yeah.
I also should mention our other son. And he, when he was a sophomore, he went to his forecasting appointment with his counselor for his junior and senior year. And he came home very frustrated. He was in very advanced math and science at that point, and he was told that he either had to pursue his math and science or he could be an athlete. And that had to do with the scheduling. And anyway, it's a long story, but he was told, and he came home so frustrated. He wanted to be an athlete and he wanted to take his math and science. And so I said to him, figure something out. Go figure it out. Don't complain. Go find a solution. And so about a week later, he came to me and said, hey, Mom, because he couldn't drive then, can you take me to this appointment with a college counselor at a community college? And I said, all right. And we met with her. And anyway, long story short, he ended up finding an early college program for himself that allowed him to take, he basically attended all of his classes junior and senior year at the community college. And he also could play sports for his local team. So he got the best of both worlds. It was completely his decision. And it all came down to, he did a lot of math in terms of, for the same credit hours that he would get in high school, I think it was a 9 to 1. So he would spend about 1 hour in this college program versus 9 hours at the public school for the same outcome. And so, again, it was really empowering them to go find, and it's a different journey for him. It's not the same, but he loved it. He never looked back.
I love that. I love that. You has definitely, both of you, given me lots of light bulb moments. I love it. And everyone's just resonating, you know. I truly agree. Learning has to be personal oftentimes. And just recently I gave a talk to a group of students, still high school, a bit young. Like when I asked them, what do you want to do in life? I feel like there were just like 20 robots in front of me, like lawyer, like a medical doctor, a computer engineer. There was no emotion coming out of their mouth. It's just like, I was like, oh, wow. And it's really interesting. And to me, because, you know, when I talk about my passion, you know, like you can feel my passion. There's emotion coming from my heart. But like so many children, they have no idea what they want to do, right? I love like what a contrast you are presenting right now. Like both of your children, they know clearly what they want to do, and they have that level of agency, and they preserved that level of agency that were given to us when we were babies, and they haven't lost that. So I really, really love that. Very, very good point. And I love this point from Pam, you know, talking about like AP classes, and I agree, right? Like my children are still young, and when they grow older, I'm definitely not going to go to that route. And I want to share this quick article. Actually, one of my friends just shared with me, and there are actually a few schools, and they will end the use of SAT and ACT in admissions. And to me, this is good news. And I want to hear you, both of you, what do you think about this? You know, the emphasis on academic performance. Like I see this as a much needed trend, you know, less emphasis on scores, exams, and but more room for innovation and creativity. What do you think about that? Do you, when you see changes like that?
I mean, I certainly, the testing I've never, you know, been a huge fan of myself. I mean, I think you have to kind of like look at what are you preparing for, you know, and you're in high school, like what are you preparing for? What do you want to, you know, and you're not going to necessarily know. Some people, you know, some people do, and I'd say most probably don't. They really don't have a good idea. But, you know, it kind of comes back to the, you know, the why a little bit. Like what are, you know, what are you preparing for in doing this? Are you preparing to go to college, you know, from high school, or are you preparing to go into a trade? And I think, you know, the plan that you set out for yourself needs to be appropriate for what you think you want to do, right? And that may change, and that's okay. But you know, I think it's good to have a plan that you're working towards, knowing that you're open to it, you know, maybe diverging one way or another, because you may get into it and find out that's not what you really like, you know. Another, you know, kind of funny thing about our other son, Brady, he, you know, he told us, it's probably about 4 years ago, something like that, but he said he wanted to be an entomologist. He wanted to go live in the forest and learn about bugs. And I don't even know what an entomologist does, but he was super interested in it. And I think he still is to some degree. So, but, you know, we said, hey, you know, one thing you should do is you should go, you know, try to find somebody who does this and, you know, figure out, you know, learn from them, see what you can learn from them. And so he did. He you know, he went off and found some guy and emailed him, and, you know, the guy emailed him back the next day, and he, you know, told him about, you know, being an entomologist and how fun it was. And by the way, if you want to make a living, you might want to go have a backup plan. It's kind of what the guy told him, you know, but it was just cool, because he kind of just gave him a straight story. Like, this is absolutely fun. I love it. It's my life. But anyways, I've kind of gone off topic a little bit. But
no, I love that example. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
But I did want to comment. I saw Betsy commented on there about what did you do if you're, you know, advice for kids who don't know what they want to do. And I want to clarify that I don't think either of our kids really knows what they want to do. I think our approach has always been keep your options open. That's really what our mantra has been, is keep your opportunities open. And so, and our younger son, we always are, you know, say something shiny or squirrel, it totally distracts him. He'll go from one thing to another, but we encourage him to go all in on whatever it is that interests him at the time. And it changes, and it's not about either one of them. I mean, Brennan's doing what he loves to do now, but he's fully aware, and he has so many different irons in the fire, looking, always exploring what might he do next. And so I think the advice is the same for whether your kid knows what they want to do or not. But I definitely think our kids don't know what they want to do. They just know what interests them at that time. And we always are saying, all in, go for it.
Yeah, and then as a parent, you don't judge, you just like facilitate. And I already, like, from everything you shared so far, and you mentioned this, go figure it out. I hear that a lot. I assume you say that a lot at home, go figure it out. I think that is such a great way to parent, to coach our students and our children, not like show up as a dictator. Hey kid, I know, do ABC 10 steps, but you actually encourage them to figure it out. I love this. Yeah, very, very powerful. Yeah. We have
oh, go ahead. I was gonna say, I just
sorry.
very young, we fortunately, this thing called Google existed, and they would come in we have a little office, in our house, and they'd come in the office and they'd ask us a question, and and if it was something that I felt like they could look it up themselves, that's exactly what we would tell them to do. Go, have you looked it up on Google yet, right? Like teaching them how to be resourceful is so, I just can't it's so important to teach them how to be.
Exactly. I mean, like, I think, like, for children to go to a school or homeschooled is to learn how to learn, not necessarily like the specific content. Today's information is tomorrow's misinformation, especially if they're into business. Everything's changing so fast. So here's another question from I think it was Dan joining us live. Thank you so much. So would you have considered homeschooling, which has become a lot popular? Recently, I actually interviewed quite a few homeschoolers on the show already. So what do you think about that? Would you have considered that as an option?
I think yes. It makes me feel a little lazy to answer that question because it is so much effort and work. And I don't mean that I wouldn't do that. I think that the homeschooling options that exist now that are different than what existed when our kids were younger. And so I definitely would now. The alternatives, our kids have both in their own way had a non-traditional experience. And for both of them, that was absolutely mandatory. And so I definitely would consider it. But I also value the relationships that were made with people via the regular school, and not necessarily with the kids, but with the learning what it's like to live in a society with systems and how you deal with them. Do you just go along with them? Do you fight them? Do you manipulate them to your best ability to, for them to work for you, and not in a bad way, but
exactly.
So I see benefits in both, but yeah, I mean, I probably, if I had younger kids now, it would be a different story. I don't think our kids would have taken the exact same path they took today.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly would have been a conversation that Maya and I would have had, because I think my initial view on it is definitely I wouldn't want to homeschool them. I feel like the experience they get, and again, there may be different options now. So, and I'm not super familiar with them, so probably not fair for me to say what exists today. But I think that social experience of being in school with, where all their friends are made. And again, there's a different path where you'll make friends in other ways too. So I know there are different paths, but for me, my initial reaction would have been, no, I would have wanted them to go to public school and enhance their schooling. I saw on your Facebook, you had a quote from Mark Twain, which I really, really liked, right? Which was around, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. And that's very much how I feel. Like schooling, I think, was important. There's a lot they're going to learn there, but their education, so much of their education is going to occur outside of school.
Classroom without walls, shameless plug.
What's that?
Classroom without walls. That's kind of our tagline.
Oh, yeah, no, I really it's
outside the classroom.
Nail on the head for me. So that's what we try to do is enhance their education outside of their schooling, and we did that in many ways, by trying to make learning and education fun, right? Because it's not always fun, and it can be fun in school, but it's not always fun in school. And so a lot of things that we would do outside of school, they were learning without necessarily knowing they were learning, because it was fun. We played a dice game when they were very young, and it got them very, very sharp at adding things up very quickly, much faster than we could, because we were just over time we were just I don't know, we get slower, I guess, I don't know, but our kids were much faster at adding things up during this game, and it gave them confidence. It was fun. There was so many good things that would come out of that. They don't think about. So anyway.
Yeah. I want to kind of follow up on this and really ask you about, failures and mistakes. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. One thing I noticed in my own students is that they're so afraid of making mistakes and failures. Actually, research has shown that as they grow older, and they become even more unwillingly to make mistakes and failures. And last weekend, I had a conversation with an educator, and she teaches in high school math. And she shared something that was so shocking for me to hear. She said that students, they refuse to write down their answers on a piece of paper if you give them a regular pen as opposed to, pencil with the eraser on the top. That's how afraid they are. I just can't believe that. And so like we all know as adults, how important making mistake is to our growth. So how do you nurture that at home to really encourage them, especially if they're running businesses? I'm sure they have encountered quite a few barriers, roadblocks, failures, and mistakes. So how do you encourage them? Like when failures and mistakes happen, what do you do? What is the conversation that you are having with your children to build that resilience?
I think resilience is key, and also responsibility. It was never a problem if they made a mistake. It was now you're responsible for the outcome, and what are you going to do? It was always on to the next step. What did you learn? And I'm sorry if that made you feel bad, but now if you do that again, this is how you're going to feel. And really about taking responsibility for the outcome and the next step. What do you do now? And I think that applies to so much. And it's also with that becomes owning the successes as well, that they truly own their success. It's not to anyone else. And they know that only because we let them own the failures too. They have to own both. They go hand in hand. And so I think part of it was just, obviously when they were really young, there's a lot more comforting involved with failure. But I think learning from such a young age that everybody makes mistakes, and we shared our failures with them as well. We definitely made mistakes in life and business and whatever we're doing, and having open conversations. I do think a lot of the kids that come and hang out at our house comment to our son about the conversations we have, just because they're involved in that conversation and we share things with them. Our failures are raw and open, but it's part of the discussion of life. This is what it's like to be in life, and this is what you do to move on. And maybe you're a little embarrassed, and that's okay.
I love failure is part of taking risk, right? Like if you're afraid of failing, you won't be willing to take risks. And so I think helping them understand that's part of that failure is part of what's going to happen. So you should expect failure. And in fact, if you're not failing, are you taking enough risk in what you're doing? So not, to look at it as bad is just a mistake. It's part of the equation. It's part of the game. And so it's all how you, again, set expectation, around what failure actually is. People immediately probably think bad. Failure is bad. Not everybody, but it they can think that. And so I think that's an important part of it. The other thing is just around consequence. With failure comes consequences. Maia kind of alluded to, and as a parent, what you have to kind of think ahead a little bit and determine if the consequence that might occur from what you're letting them do. Again, this is kind of staying in bounds versus going out of bounds. If the consequence is something that you as a parent can't live with them having to deal with, you probably shouldn't let them do it, because bailing them out is only going to probably make things worse in the long run. So, and you can't always know that up front, but the more you can, I think the better chance you have of, them being able to deal with their own consequences.
Yeah, I love that. Goes back to what you both mentioned earlier, treating your children almost as like peers, adults, independent human beings. You have open discussion, make yourself vulnerable, talk about things. And that open line of communication, really, really powerful. I think many people don't practice that at home, right? Like we have this power hierarchy, right? I'm the parents. I'm like, here, you are the kid. And I can really see like damages. And even like many people still practice reward and punishment. And I think doing that is also slowly taking away our children's agency to practice what both of your children are doing, intrinsic desire, to learn and grow. So I want to talk about the social emotional aspect of learning and being a children, running a business. And before we went live, I shared that earlier. Like I have actually interviewed quite a few like 13, 14, 17, very young, successful entrepreneurs. I really love Brennan because he's very socially, emotionally intelligent. His emotional intelligence is really high. And I wonder, like, because I remember at some point he was hiring like the parents of his classmates. That I was like, that's interesting. So how does he navigate that social space, right? Like, it's like, for example, Johnny is my classmate, but his parents are working for me. Like, that's a very interesting social dynamic, right? So how do you help him navigate that, understand power dynamic and age, things like that? I'm just curious how you facilitate that.
I mean, I think generally he's a well-balanced person. So he's again, he did well in school. He had a lot of interest outside of school. He played sport. He's a very talented athlete, which he doesn't talk about much.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and so he's very well balanced, and to today, and whether I'm sure part of that is just inherent, right? Like that's kind of who he is to some degree, but and I think that balance helps with kind of the being able to deal with different situations, the age, going back to kind of the having dealt with people that are much older than them when they were young. I'm sure that played a really big role in that. So I think those are a couple of things that probably have contributed to his his emotional, social, what he is.
I think for me, looking back, it probably has a lot to do with the exposure to different ages. I know that our neighbors had no problem. Our neighbor Mary is like their grandma, and if they hurt her feelings, she would tell them. You hurt my feelings. And I think when we remove our kids from those situations, me telling them, oh, you hurt so-and-so's feeling, I still did that, but it's less impactful than that person telling them. And so they learned, they made their mistakes. They hurt people's feelings or they were unkind, and those people held them to that. And I think it was far more powerful for them in terms of building their understanding of how you operate in the social structure that we live in, because of those structures. I can't say for sure that's what it is, but my younger son, he was before COVID, was known for his strong handshake and looking people in the eye. And the parents always would call me and say, I love talking to your son. He was over at my house last night and he sat and talked to me for 3 hours. And just that willingness to engage people. I think there's so much feedback that they get from those experiences that is very subtle, but is so much more impactful than coming from an authoritarian parent saying, this is what happened. So I can only guess, but I think that's what has impacted their social emotional intelligence.
I'm totally, like many of you we have quite a few people join us live right now. Many of you probably missed the first few minutes when they mentioned one thing that Bryan and Maia did very differently in their parenting is to really create that mixed age environment. And I love that. I can see how their social emotional skills are benefiting from that mixed age, very diverse background. And I think that is one of my biggest takeaway. We are doing that at home, and even at my own school, we adopt a mixed age model. But this point really resonating with me strongly because many of my own undergraduate students, like 20 years old or something, they really have a hard time communicating with people older than them. They really struggle with that. So like I really love that point you mentioned, and so thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I wonder if you can share with us, in knowing what you know today, raising two amazing, successful children, and so in retrospect, what do you think are some common mistakes or really outdated practices when it comes to parenting that we should, disrupt, we should move on, we should avoid?
I mean, for me, it kind of goes back to maybe what I said earlier, which was just kind of staying out of their way a little bit. I think it's very common to want to control the narrative, if you will, or not. I don't know if the narrative is the right word, but control the path that your kids take, because it can be scary, right? Like you're taking a risk as a parent by letting them do certain things that are probably outside of your comfort level, and so being able to separate what makes you uncomfortable, maybe because of what has occurred in your life, versus what might make your kids uncomfortable, and not projecting that upon them, which is really hard to do, and I think in our case it takes two people, to sometimes recognize that. So I think, that's a big part of it, is try your best just to stay out of your way, do your job as a parent, which is to protect them and, love them, and there's many other things, but just don't get in their way. Like they'll carve their own path, and, keep them in bounds.
I love that.
I think I can comment, probably, I don't know. I look at my parents and how they parented me, and how their parents parented them. And so I sort of look at it generationally and the things that I do differently than my parents did for me. And the things that I think are really adapting to the new world. And it's very easy to carry standards from the old model down a generation. But my world is nothing like my parents' world, and my children's world, I have to acknowledge, is nothing like my world. And so being constantly flexible, I think is a requirement. And I really didn't feel that from my parents. They were first generation college students, college graduates, and their expectations of me were much more rigid than what I expect of my children. And so for me, the things that I saw that I wanted to change as a parent were that authoritative rule of the parent, that the parent always knew what the answer was, and how to do things. And then also just being open to outside influence. I think there was always, my mother, one of her lines was, "I didn't raise you to be XYZ." And I never raised my kids to be XYZ. I always felt like it wasn't my right to do that. It's their life. And so they get to, I do my best to raise them, but not with an expectation of how they're going to end up. I hear a lot of people talk about, well, I don't, for whatever reason, they expect their kids to get married and they expect to be able to walk them down the aisle. And I just feel, to me, that's pretty, that's not how I live, because it's not my right to expect my child to get married or any of that, or to expect to have grandchildren. If it happens, I might really enjoy that, but that is not my right to impose my wants on them. Is sort of how we've always parented, that, we're along for the ride and we'll do our best to guide them, but it's their life, not ours.
Well, I love that so much. I feel like both of you children are so lucky. All of you are so lucky to have each other. The amount of trust, the autonomy that you have given to your children is incredible. I mean, it's much easier to say this than actually doing this myself. Like my husband and I, we try to give our children lots of autonomy, but there are moments like, are we giving them too much freedom? And you really have you ever had moments like that? Is this too free? Is this too self-directed? Have you ever had a thought like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always have to evaluate what's, you have to be constantly evaluating that, because, there are times where maybe trust was questioned, which during a natural period in their life. And, so I don't think you just do it blindly, but you continue to question and correct when needed.
And I would just like to say that it's hard. It's so hard. It's so much work. And everyone who's watching this live cast is just by being here, that's extra effort. And I just want to acknowledge that, because one of the things that I found, I was a lot more in contact with other parents on a daily basis. I was really involved with my kids' school. And I question myself all the time, every day. I question everything that we do, and it's exhausting. But we felt, or at least I felt, like we owed that to our kids. And I was willing to put in the effort to do that. And I think there's plenty. I had a friend who used to tell me her kids were perfectly average, and she was completely happy that they were totally average. And she used to kind of mock me a little bit that my kids were so much work. And years later, when her kids were in college, she came back and said, maybe my plan of having them be exactly average wasn't so good, because then she was dealing with so much more work then. But yes, I question myself all the time. I'm constantly recalibrating, but I do want to just acknowledge when you say, you question yourself, that's so much work. It's a lot of effort. So at least give yourself credit for, as a parent,
Thank you.
putting that in.
I also love how you mentioned, like so much work. It's not actually you are doing the work for them, which is actually easier, but you are like kind of facilitating, trying to understand them and make things happen. That part is really hard. Sometimes I feel like, okay, it is much easier. I actually do this for you, but I can't do it for you. And that is definitely hard work, but definitely you can long-term ROI for sure. Yeah. Thank you for adding that point. Yeah. And I'm also curious, you mentioned earlier that Maia and Bryan, you both are kind of like different, have a different parenting approach. Based on the conversation so far, I couldn't tell any difference. I wonder if you can share, because me and my husband are also a little bit different. So I wonder if you can share what's the the tension, if there's any, like what's the difference?
I don't know that there's a lot of differences. I mean, I think there's, I don't know, you have a better.
I think it's more of a balance than attention. We balance each other out. We do a lot of tag teaming where, I'll have a lot of late night conversations with the boys, and then there'll be other times when I've had it and it's his turn. I mean, I think we both bring different things to the table. It's hard to pinpoint any one thing. I think we are very on the same page, but we're not exactly the same. And we disagree about, certain smaller things, but we discuss those disagreements with the kids, and rather than us discussing it and then presenting a single common front. And we definitely come across as a team to them, but we also expose to them that we have different views, and there's constantly compromise. So I don't know if that helps, Anne. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one thing I could
show up as a team. Yes.
We're totally, totally out of sync on. There's usually small things that come up during conversation, and we talk through them, and we usually end up in the same spot. So.
That's awesome. I love it. And we're just like wrapping this up. So share with us, like where both of you are not that active on social media. Maybe like where is a way for people to learn more about your company and business and things like that.
I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, and under my name. So I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook. I'm not super active on them. Every once in a while I'll kind of post stuff, but yeah, so you can get me on any of those places.
Yeah, we're not super active on social media. We've actually learned that from our kids. It's been a very interesting journey. They're both very, very cautious about their social media, and I think we followed suit. But I mean, I'm mostly on Facebook, but I don't. Sorry, we don't post a lot.
Oh, no worries. I mean, that's
working.
Yeah, certainly to
work.
Certainly to connect with us. Those are LinkedIn and Facebook are probably the two places best to connect. And we're tech savvy. We're just not super social media.
It's okay. I mean, you have Brennan, your children, they're taking care of everything. Exactly. So definitely check out their amazing socks. And so I share that on the screen. You will see a link to their Instagram if you are interested in ordering some socks with your own picture, dogs, cats. I actually have a pair myself. I love the quality. And so any parting piece of advice in terms of parenting and raising children to become successful, resilient, and emotionally, socially holistic? And any parting piece of advice from each of you that you want to share with us? Has been such a great conversation. Everyone in the comment section has been loving what you both have shared so far. Yeah, thank you.
I would just say trust your gut, and learn to be uncomfortable. It's something we've taught our kids. And I think as a parent, I have to do that too. There's social pressure. Certainly you go out in the community and your kids aren't doing what everyone else is doing. There's that discomfort on the sidelines of the soccer field. You feel it. Be okay with that. Embrace it. Suck it up for your kids. It's worth it. That would be my.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess, enjoy the journey. It goes very fast. As I know it's, everybody says that, and it's absolutely true with both of our kids nearly out of the house. But so, yeah, I mean, I would say just, enjoy it and make it fun. Like, don't create tension that isn't needed, and kind of focus on the battles that make sense to focus on. And that'll help to remove unnecessary stress and help you with your relationships with them. So yeah, have fun.
Totally amazing. Thank you. I feel like this conversation has already made me a better mom, a better educator. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone in the live audience been commenting like crazy. I love it. I can't wait to go back and revisit the comments and the show. So next Friday, same time, I actually have a homeschooler. She spent her entire time and being homeschooled. So very interesting perspective, a very young, successful woman, and share her journey being a homeschooler. So definitely join us live next Friday, same time, same location. And thank you so much, everyone, for spending a Friday 1 hour with us. And have a great weekend. Bye.